Jonah, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really
Pleasure.
excited to get to know you. Jonah is the new incoming CEO of Assembly Software, known for its product suite, namely the Neos Cloud application that I recently received a demo of. You can read the product review below. Jonah, so excited for this conversation. We've got a lot to talk about. Before we dive in, would you mind giving our audience just a little bit of background about yourself and how you came to join the team?
Excellent. Chelsey, it's a pleasure to be here. My name, as you said, is Jonah Paransky, and I am not new to the legal tech space. And so what's very exciting to me about rejoining Assembly is that I really started my career as a leader of software businesses after the first half of my career spent leading product management and marketing functional teams in the B2B software world. When I joined LexisNexis back in 2009, leading the small law practice management group. So I spent 6 or 7 years at LexisNexis leading different software businesses inside of the LexisNexis software portfolio. I had an opportunity to lead the small law practice management business, PC law, time matters, and juris, the counseling business, which focuses on the enterprise legal management space and the needs of corporate counsel, and then spent several years leading the broader business of law software solutions group at LexisNexis, which included both of those product lines, the leading large law marketing solution at the time, as well as a IT infrastructure and outsourcing business for large law firms. And so that was my first exposure to legal tech and was a great experience really getting into what for me at the time was a new market and helping solve problems for law firms, corporate counsel and their needs. And so then I left the legal tech world for a couple of years, took it for then 4 years. Wolters Kluwer ELM Solutions is a leader in the enterprise legal management space. Once again, the system of record that corporate counsel use to manage day-to-day operations and outside counsel spend. They are primarily for large global companies, right? Very enterprise oriented, the year of outside counsel spend through their systems, which if you think about them in the context for a small or mid-sized law firm is a whole lot of legal work. Then left legal again, spent a couple years in the MarTech space, so looking at technology for the marketing part of organizations, and then went to the Access Group where I focused on a wide variety of verticals, bringing Access's set of capabilities into the US and established our hospitality vertical here in the US as well for Access. And then just recently joined Assembly. And so I'm very excited to come back into the legal space and have an opportunity to work with this tremendous team, really focused on solving, I think, some very important problems at a very interesting time inside of the legal tech space for law firms and in particular for personal injury firms.
And I can attest that your team is phenomenal, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know a few of them over the course of the last couple months and doing the product demo to support the review. Was very impressed. I had seen previous versions of the solution, and it really has evolved to be best in class product, especially for personal injury firms and family law firms. So our readers can read more about that in the product review or book a demo to see it firsthand themselves. As it relates to the transformation that we have seen in our space from one legal tech veteran to another, the world is very different than it was in the early 2000s, even pre-COVID, post-COVID, and the explosion of adoption that we saw there is nothing compared to what we're seeing in this age of AI. And would love to hear your take on the direction of the product, how you view AI capabilities in platform, but also how will it transform the legal firms that you serve?
When I think about the core system that many of the vendors of the space have been building for a long time, workflow systems, right? The system you use to manage your work, right? I think in particular, there are some verticals, right, which have adopted case management systems more enthusiastically, right? Or practice areas, right, let's call it, that have adopted case managements more philosophically and enthusiastically to really manage the work of the firm. A great example of that is PI firms, right? Where there are clear, repeatable processes, right? You build those out in your solution. You use it to manage a large number of lawyers and non-lawyers working together so that you can go through what is a pretty consistent process of doing work on behalf of your customers, right? If you think about the first implication of AI on those firms, right? AI is a great tool, right, to help provide additional value in the management of the case through the process, right? I call that, and I haven't really worked yet now 4 weeks into the role on a better term, but I call that workflow AI, right? It's the AI that really exists to say, I'm using a system to manage the process of moving things through my work, and AI is going to make that better. For example, when I open a case, What I really want to know is at any point in time is what's happening in the case, right? AI is a tremendous tool when properly implemented so that I can know the status of everything that's going on in the case at any point in time without having to have my team type in updated case summaries by hand, which no one bothered doing, right? Every day, every minute, every hour. Now you can use tools so that at any point in time, you know exactly where the case is and where it is on its journey. There are 1,000 examples of that, right? And I think that that first capability is where we started seeing AI evolving for firms that had structured workflows that wanted to accelerate the effectiveness of that tooling for people and make it easier for them to do their work. That's one form of AI. Another form of AI is AI that can, in essence, help attorneys and the folks who work in their firms do the work itself, right? This can be the work that a Harvey or a Legora is doing, right? Typically more for hourly billable firms or for corporations, which is you take the typical work of an attorney and you break it up into little jobs and you say, is this work that an AI can do as effectively and as accurately as a person can, right? As a way of giving people an opportunity to do more by having your tools do that, right? Very similar to what we're seeing in coding, right? Where you now have AI able to write high quality code. That code is a quality level where it is equivalent to a junior developer going into a midline developer. And can you do the same thing with the jobs, right, or work of an attorney? And I think what we're seeing now is that's starting to happen, right? We've gotten to the point now over the last 6 months, 9 months, but it gets better every month, where more and more of that work is possible. And I think in some of the practice areas, the challenge we're going to have is one of economics, which is if I can come to you and sell you a junior attorney, but the economics of your law firm is dependent on, in essence, selling the hours of junior attorneys, right? Buying a junior attorney that you can't sell for a profit the way you sold your junior attorneys for a profit means that the economics of the billable hour become problematic. And look, we've all been talking in legal tech for 20 years about the economics of the billable hour and the challenges of the billable hour. But it's not like 90% of the work today being done is not billable hour work. And so I don't think we know yet what's going to happen with the evolution of AI and the billable hour and what that means for law firms, right? Could it mean that corporations, right, do more work than they did before because the economic incentives make more sense? Maybe. I don't know. What I do know is for firms that have structured workflows and where the economics are different, and I think personal injury is a great example of this, there are others, right? Where the economics are not dependent on the billable hour, but instead are dependent on best work product. And the way you make money is by managing cost against that work product. You now have alignment between vendors and the law firms around incentives to drive focus on AI. Right? You have to do it in a way that makes it really easy for attorneys to check the work because they're still ethically responsible for the work product. Those things all matter a tremendous amount, probably more than ever. But at the same time, the economics are right. And so in that world, what you've started to see is the rise of sick AI solutions that really at the beginning have started focusing on the deliverables, at least in personal injury, that personal injury firms work on, demand letters, medical chronologies, right? That take an inordinate amount of work, are done all the time, right? Right. PI firms put out 5, 10, hundreds of demand letters a week, depending on their size and scale, and they can take 20, 30, 40 hours a week of manual work. If you can automate a lot of the work of the creation of those, you're now making your firm radically more efficient. And we've started to see that evolving in this space. But what's interesting right now is mostly there are vendors doing that on the AI side, and there are workflow vendors on the other side. And I think this world will naturally evolve, right, to combining the two together, where workflow vendors are uniquely positioned, like us here at Assembly, to be able to provide those kinds of AI outcomes, where now you're helping firms do more of the work they do on top of the workflow and part of the workflow, as opposed to separate from it. It's a more seamless experience. It's integrated in the workflow from a vendor perspective. It's stickier, right? It's very easy for firms to just switch around between tool vendors, but there's also a lot of friction in having a tool vendor over here, and you have to take all your information from this solution and moving into that solution or technically integrate them. And so I really see this industry evolving in the direction of workflow AI, plus now AI solutions that are focused on how do we make the firm more efficient in the work they do, not just in the flow of work they do. as really the direction I expect the organization to go, and certainly one that we're looking at from an assembly perspective every single day right now.
Yeah, and that's an excellent call out, and would love to pause and discuss the transition from products going to the legal workflow to software solutions focusing on, as you said, outcomes. So more and more when I hear founders or leaders speak about their solutions, especially as it relates to AI, they're focused on what is the end product, what is the actual outcome, what is the business impact that utilizing this toolkit drives, as
Yep.
opposed to this is the one problem that we solve with this one solution. So I do completely agree that we're moving into much more business efficiency and overall impact mindset in technology evaluation, as opposed to I need a product that does this one thing and it does it very well, and I might have to buy 6 different solutions to service the overall processes inside of the case delivery process inside my firm.
Look, I think that as I think about how that's going to evolve over time, right? The trick is you have to do a couple things well, right? These tools need to be less friction rather than more friction. The easier they are to use, the better they'll be adopted. That's true of all technology, but I think in this space it's particularly important. But as important is trust, right? How do I know that all of the information I have is being used by the tools, right? How do I know that the tools are trustworthy? Have you given an easy way for me to check my tools work, right? Because the one thing I think we have started to see is that when you don't use tools that provide the trust basis you need, right, you can get in a lot of trouble as an attorney with ethical obligations, right? Most of the stories I would argue we've seen about the ethical obligation challenges of tools like these are folks who are choosing generic tools as opposed to vertically focused tools, right? They're going and they're picking up ChatGPT off the shelf, and ChatGPT is an amazing tool, right? But it's not designed to provide the trust you need in your legal sources to be able to effectively use it for citations for something you're going to go file in court, right?
Right.
And so you need to have tooling that lets you directly connect the work you're doing to the facts you're using in a way that can provide you the trust that the tool hasn't gone out of bounds in a way that is unsafe, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's very important. But I think outcomes have always been important. We just haven't talked about them well. So, for example, if I'm a firm, why should I buy a case management solution? And the number one reason is because it enables predictable management of customer experiences, right? Right. So if you're a process-oriented law firm and you want to ensure that your customers have consistently excellent outcomes, one of the best ways to do that is to have a tool like an Assembly Neos, right? That when implemented and used by the firm walks through a prescribed set of steps that we always use to go from A to E, right? And I think that sometimes traditionally attorneys have not been very process oriented in their thinking. It's sort of a knock on the profession. But I think that there are some practice areas like personal injury where that is not the case. And I think that the tooling that supports that means that we can then go from talking about one outcome, which is consistent client deliverable, to a new outcome, which is more efficient, consistent client deliverables. And then even to say, well, can these tools provide regularly higher quality outcomes? Or even more importantly, better outcomes on behalf of our firm's customers, which is why we do this, right? We do it for ourselves from an economic perspective. And I think that both of those things at the same time are hugely powerful, and we're going to start seeing the solutions evolve in that direction.
And to speak about the going back to the economics, personal injury firms are adopting PI or are adopting AI faster than any other area of law. They're contingency based. They've always been focused on cost control and efficiency, often high volume. They've had to automate the intake and the lead qualification process at levels that other areas of law really have not paid as much attention to. So if we separate,
I like your term as much as opposed to any, but continue.
yeah, well, it ties directly back to the billable hour. And as you said, we've all been delivering CLEs and preaching for the last 20 years that the billable hour will not at some point make sense. What are the primary blockers outside of just the pure, I don't want to lose my opportunity to bill every hour in increments of 2 minutes, rounding up to 6 in these other areas of law, because AI will displace my ability to be profitable? If you were to separate the economics of it, what do you see or feel the other areas of law, the family law firms, the estate planning firms, like why are they struggling to adopt these tools, or what do you see being the biggest blockers of
Yeah.
their
So,
adoption?
yeah, so a couple things. I think there are several challenges. If I use an analogy, which I think is relevant, right? I've been very involved here over the last year in organizations that are transforming not only their tools they sell as software businesses, but how they work. And I think the best analogy here is what we're seeing with the adoption of agentic software development tools, right? Tools like a Cognition Devon or a Claude Code or a Cursor, right? Where you're starting to see the evolution of developers from writers of code to managers of technology writers of code. And I think that that is a big shift in mindset and orientation. It feels completely different. When I measured my worth by how many lines of code I personally wrote, a developer was someone who wrote a lot of code. And great developers either wrote even more code or solved really hard problems by writing the code themselves. Right? Right? That was sort of your right. Your technical crowning achievement was you were the best, right, at putting out code. Right. And I think often for attorneys, right, you're the best at writing the best brief, or you're the best at building the best legal argument, or you're the best at putting out, right, the best possible outcome. And I think that reality, right, is one that has to change in terms of mindset. And mindset is really hard to change, right? When you go from a writer of code or a writer of legal content to a manager of a tool that's doing most of the writing, right? I've seen in organizations, right, a change where a developer used to write the code or 90% of the code to now you're seeing organizations where developers are writing 10% of the code or 20% of the code and the tools are writing 70% or 80%, and you're checking the work and you're organizing the tooling and you're building the plans and you're deciding the arguments, but drafting, right, which is much of the job for many, is moving out of your responsibility sphere. That's such a change that you can't expect that's going to happen overnight. It takes a long time. And I think we'll see it fastest where there aren't economic at odds issues, right? And I don't want to downplay those, right? Existential threats to how you eat slow down adoption of tools, right? But at the same time, I think that we'll also find adoption will be gated by the ability for individuals to recognize that the jobs are changing and that this is one of those inflection points where you really have to think about the impact of potential job responsibility changing as we go.
Yes, yes, very much it is. It's shifting to a much more strategic mindset of being the architect and the leader, defining level of quality standards and looking at every single portion of the delivery of a case and the client experience and how you elevate the quality of that work utilizing these tools as opposed to the actual doing it themselves. And I was in an AI workshop last week with my business partner Laura, and there was a very strong discussion around the craft and the ownership of and the art of delivering casework, and will AI impact the or take away from the art that truly is, like, as you very well put, being the best at crafting an argument or going to trial. So I do think it is a fundamental mindset shift, and it will be interesting to see what consumer law firm leaders, and also with the non-attorney ownership also happening at the same time, will you start to see more of a chief strategy officer approach or a legal strategy approach to leadership inside of these firms?
One thing I think about, right, when I think about this evolution is the other issue is attorneys, often even very senior attorneys, right, are less managers than high profile individual contributors with teams that they've given some, but not most of the most important work. And the most effective users of these kind of tools, in my experience, have to take a managerial mindset. The tools work better if you treat them like team members that you're delegating work to, and then being responsible for giving them context and checking their work. And I think that institutionally, right, the mindset shift you see in developers is every developer from junior developers to senior developers are moving from being developers to being managers of teams of developers. And for attorneys, I'm not sure always that mindset shift is as easy. And part of the reason I think why you're seeing better adoption in PI is because PI firms have higher ratios of attorneys to non-attorneys than most law firms do. And they're more used to thinking about work as something that can be chunked up and given to others, as
Yes.
opposed to as I get more experience, I just do more and more of my own harder work, right? As opposed to I can really resource out a lot of that work in quite as aggressive as a way. And I think that skill is one that we're going to have to teach and learn all together as it continues to evolve.
Yes, yes. And delegation truly is, or lack of delegation is truly the Achilles heel of so many solo and small law firms that prevent them from growing. And there's no difference between hiring staff, physical staff in your office or remote, and utilizing AI. And I could not agree with you more that a lot of the I used AI, but I had a bad experience was because they were not using a vertical specific tool as little as 12 or 18 months ago. It is wildly different. The quality of the work product, the quality of the tooling, the speed at which these solutions are moving is wildly different than it was 18 months ago. So I think we're also now seeing for the first time the bad experience, non-adoption argument. I tried it once, it wasn't for me, it didn't produce what I expected. Come give it another try.
And I think people make a mistake of thinking that with no training and without thinking about how they're going to use the tool, they can go in, they can ask one very hard question with no context of the tool. They're using a generic tool and it doesn't work. And I think that what I've seen is every 2 to 3 months, we are seeing step changes in capabilities, which means that my organization's uses of these tools are radically different today than they were before. And as I think about the transformation that comes from how you run your business, how you build your products, and how you build capabilities for customers, right? We just don't need, right, to think about what was yesterday. We need to constantly be checking in to see how those capabilities evolve.
Yes, yes. There's a good analogy about the size of a rear view mirror compared to your windshield that I always love to use.
Yep.
What happened 6, 12, 18 months ago as far as software and tooling is feels like a decade ago now for how fast we're moving. I want to be mindful of your time and come
Thank you
back.
so much, Chelsey.
Yes, of course. And come back to the vision for Assembly Neos as a product. So you have released and made a beautiful transition from traditional tooling to a cloud-based application. You can read more, or readers can read more in the product review below. But where do you see the product evolving in the next 12 months?
I think you're going to see a strong focus by the assembly team in a couple areas, right? Number one is this combination, I think, at its core of world-class workflow, continuing to make that workflow capability more capable, easier to use, right? A better experience for our customers, right? In terms of driving the repeatable process of doing the work. I think you'll see us investing heavily in the AIification of the use of that workflow to make it easier to drive that consistency of work over time. And then I think you'll see us strongly focus as well on how do we think about providing that efficiency lens towards providing AI capabilities that take advantage of the data and the context that comes from being a workflow vendor and being in the workflow solution, right? Directly into then how do we help our customers become more efficient in the work they're doing and really thinking about all the different capabilities around bringing customers in and generating the deliverables you need to generate and doing the analysis you need to do. And where are there really big pieces of work where the combination of our workflow capabilities and AI can really provide value for them and for their customers in terms of providing better work product, scaling faster, being more efficient as firms. And I think we'll see opportunities across all of those as we go.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, any final thoughts as we wrap up today for our audience as they evaluate their options in this space?
I think this is an incredibly exciting time, right? For us and for the market. It's rare that you see an inflection point coming this quickly and in such a pinpointed way in any market, let alone in legal tech, which I think has had a long-term reputation as being a somewhat sleepy market, now undergoing shockingly rapid change. What I would say to everyone watching this video is take a step back and think about who you want to partner with, not only today, but for tomorrow. And I think what we'll focus on at Assembly is being the kind of partner that you can trust to not only continually innovate, but know that our goal is to provide the best outcomes, not only for you, but also for your end user clients. And that combination in a partner is what is frankly most important because the tooling is going to change. The technology is going to continue to change. And these partnerships don't last 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, right? We have a 40-year history as an organization dedicated to providing great outcomes for our customers, and we're dedicated to continue doing that going forward. And we look forward for the opportunity to earn the right to work with all of you in the market today. And so thank you so much, Chelsey, and thank you to everyone who's been watching.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonah. Such a pleasure getting to know you and hearing your perspective today. I encourage everyone to take a deeper dive and look at Assembly's Neos product as you evaluate your options for your firm. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chelsey.